One other observation you talk about in your chapter, impact on meaningful work. You talk about not only resist debt, want less, give more, work well, trust God, but focusing on that give more. Because I'd love to hear from an apologetic standpoint. You speak about altruism, and I always am very curious why altruism even exists. You mentioned Socrates, Adam Smith believed it was due to self-interest. What's your thoughts about altruism?
I agree with them. I think it is something that we are capable of. It's part of the enigma of man, that we are capable of such goodness, yet deeply fallen. So this is two things that are running on two tracks. And the Christian worldview explains these. We are designed in the image of God, so we know what we ought to do, and we know what we can't, and we occasionally do it. But we are also deeply rebellious fallen humans who, in the line of Adam, are constantly rebelling against what we know we ought to do. It's called sin. So this enigma of man, I think, is what explains it. Now, you'll see that there are studies that show how altruistic we can be, but even the secular studies that show that once resources become limited, we become less altruistic. We're willing to give until, of course, there's a pandemic, and now we're hoarding toilet paper. What's that about? Well, it's because the resources become limited, and now suddenly our true colors emerge.
I'm giving if abundant, but as a believer, it's not that way.
No, that's right. As a matter of fact, though, I'll just tell you this: altruism, kindness, is so good for our souls. Giving is one aspect of kindness. Is so good for our souls that even if you aren't the recipient of kindness, you're just the giver of kindness, you'll have the same benefits to your wellness that the recipient of the kindness does. Isn't that interesting? As a matter of fact, studies show now that if you're simply the observer of an act of kindness, you'll get the same benefits as either the giver or the receiver. That's how important mercy is to us. And an aspect of mercy, of course, is I'm going to give you my service, I'm going to give you my affection, I'm going to give you my resources, including my financial resources. So I think that this act of giving, yes, I don't want to say that you should give because it's good for you, but it's pretty clear that if you give, it is good for you. But that should not be. But that's because we're designed in the image of our Maker.
That's right.
Who gives to us.
Who is very giving.
Yes. So that's why we have this health benefit. But that should not be why we do it. We should do it because, well, number one, I think what happens is when my heart is aligned with God's heart, I can't help but do it. And a lot of it is I don't spend a lot of time saying to my kids, you need to give, or to when I was a church leader, you need to give. If they can't see the example of God's giving to us and how we model it as leaders, and if they can see it, I don't have to ask for it at all. They will naturally give at the same level they have been given to. So I think it's about us, again, keeping the gospel at the center of our attention.
Jim, where can people find you over the next few months?
Well, our book is available at thetruthintruecrime.com, The Truth in True Crime. And for this time before May 7th and even after, we offer a ton of free, here's how I feel about it. I don't want to do, I always tell people, you need to exhaust what an author can offer you for free before you ever spend $1 on his book. And I'm willing for people to do that. And so I have materials that are stacked up for free at coldcasechristianity.com. And when I write a book like this one, The Truth in True Crime, I never just do a book without giving away a bunch of free stuff with the book. So if you go to The Truth in True Crime, you'll see the package. I defy anyone to have a package for a book that's as good as the package we're giving. And it's just because I feel like, hey, the goal is not for you just to buy a book. I mean, don't buy a book you're not going to read. I want you to take the step with me. I want you to take the journey with me. So I want people to read the book and then be blessed by the book and be changed by the truths that are in Christianity, just packaged in a different way in these crime stories. So I want that. But in order to get that, sometimes you have to kind of bait people. So I want you to give you the videos, give you the PowerPoint presentations, give you a course, a 30-session course, which will be available to everyone who buys the book. I want to be able to do that. So that's at thetruthintruecrime.com.
I've read both of those two books that I've mentioned, Cold Case as well as The Truth in True Crimes, and they're amazing. You should definitely check it out. That website one more time?
It's thetruthintruecrime.com, and so those two books, basically, coldcasechristianity.com and thetruthintruecrime.com.
They're fantastic. As we wrap up, I want to ask you one last question. What are some common misconceptions that people have had about you that you'd like to straighten out? Either about your career as a homicide detective, especially with all this allure, wherever you want to go with it.
Yeah, well, first of all, I mean, one of the biggest misconceptions is that people think that people who work cold cases are assigned as cold case detectives. I worked the vast majority of my time working cold cases before we even had a cold case unit, because they're always collateral duties. So if you're in some agency in the United States right now and you're working a cold case, odds are better than not that you're not actually a cold case detective. You're just a homicide detective or a robbery homicide detective or a crimes persons detective. And you found this old case that you're intrigued by, so you opened it up and you started tinkering. And 5 years from now, you're probably going to be in front of a jury with it. And you will not have been an official cold case detective that entire time, but you'll be introduced to the jury as the cold case detective on this case. Well, because that was my career. My career was probably, well, I don't even know, 5-7 years before they even formed a cold case team, maybe even more than that, because we had 2 cases all the way through prosecution and on Dateline before we had a cold case team. As a matter of fact, it was the Dateline appearances that convinced our agency we should probably form a full-time team, which was just 2 guys, just the same 2 people who were working these cases all along. We just didn't have that title. So I think the biggest misperception, people will say all the time, well, he says he was a cold case detective. Well, no, we didn't have a cold case team until toward the very end of my career. But yeah, I worked those cold cases. Here's why. My dad was a detective, a homicide detective, and he had one case in particular that always bugged me that was never solved, because that victim was about my age, 10 years old when she died. And I remember when I first became a detective, I started picking, well, as soon as I got to an advanced detective level, I picked up that case. I was determined to solve it, and I didn't solve it. We didn't solve that case for another, it might have been more than 20 years later. It was solved in 2019.
Wow,
was
it
from
finally did get solved.
1972 was the
That's
murder.
crazy.
And it was not featured by Dateline. They did a small little piece on their website, but it was not one of those larger cases. But anyway, the point is, most of us who work cold cases, we do them collaterally while we're assigned to some other detail, which is why they take forever, because really you're just kind of tinkering. Oh, I got some time this week, I'm going to go out and do this one thing. And you're assembling that 1,000-piece case, one piece at a time, over thousands of days. And so that's why I've got cases that's run sometimes 11 years from start to finish. But I was working a bunch of other stuff too at the time. But that one case took 11 years to get convicted. So that's kind of how these cases work. And I get that sometimes online people will challenge me and say, well, wait a minute, if you were working surveillance on this date, then you weren't a cold case. Well, no, I wasn't an official cold case detective. I was a detective working a cold case.
Well, I'm glad you cleared that up.
Yeah, so anyway.
Well, I'm thankful for your service, one, for the communities that you served, but also now the service to the bigger church community and the kingdom of God. And I can't thank you enough for coming on the show as well.
Thanks for having me, Andrew. I really appreciate you. Thanks so much.